My neighbor's kids kept trespassing in my yard, breaking my expensive lawn decor. When I spoke to their mother, she rolled her eyes and said, "They're just kids, get over it." That weekend, they destroyed my rare flowers, laughing. Furious, I installed a hidden sprinkler trap. The next morning, I heard screams, and when their mother stormed over, she was covered in mud. But that wasn't even the best part. I never imagined I'd be sharing my story here, but recent events have left me with no choice. Let's dive in. I reside in a peaceful neighborhood in Charleston, South Carolina. My home is my sanctuary, and I take immense pride in maintaining a beautiful garden adorned with rare flowers and expensive lawn decorations. Gardening has always been my passion, and over the years I've curated a collection that brings me immense joy and tranquility. Several months ago, a new family moved into the house next door. The mother, whom I'll refer to as Sarah, is in her late 30s, and she has two sons, Jake, aged 10, and Lucas, aged 8. Wanting to be a good neighbor, I baked a pie and introduced myself. Sarah accepted the gesture but seemed distant, and our interaction was brief. Not long after they settled in, I began noticing minor disturbances. Toys like balls and frisbees would frequently land in my yard. Initially, I dismissed it, understanding that children at play can be a bit careless. Each time, I would toss the toys back over the fence without mentioning it to Sarah. However, things escalated when I discovered footprints trampling through my flower beds. Some of my cherished garden gnomes were knocked over, one even shattered beyond repair. I tried to rationalize it, thinking perhaps an animal was the culprit or maybe a stray ball had caused the damage. But deep down I suspected the real cause. The tipping point came one Saturday morning. I was enjoying a cup of coffee on my porch when I heard laughter and rustling from my backyard. Curious and slightly concerned, I walked over to investigate. To my astonishment, there were Jake and Lucas, wielding my solar-powered garden lights like swords, engaged in a mock battle. "Hey!" I called out, trying to keep my composure. "This is private property. You can't just come in here and play without permission." The boys froze, eyes wide with surprise. Without uttering a word, they dropped the lights and sprinted back to their house. I took a deep breath, deciding it was time to address the issue directly with their mother. That afternoon, I approached Sarah's house and knocked on the door. She answered after a few moments, looking mildly annoyed. "Hi, Sarah," I began, striving for a calm and friendly tone. "I wanted to discuss something with you regarding Jake and Lucas." She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "What about them?" "I've noticed they've been coming into my yard without permission," I explained. "They've damaged some of my property, including my garden decorations and plants. I understand they're just kids, but I would appreciate it if you could talk to them about respecting boundaries." Sarah rolled her eyes and let out a sigh. "They're just boys being boys. It's not like they're causing any real harm. Maybe you should relax a bit." I was taken aback by her dismissive attitude. I understand that children can be playful, but when it results in damage to my property, it becomes a concern. She shrugged. "I'll see what I can do," she said curtly before closing the door in my face. Feeling frustrated and unheard, I hoped that our conversation would lead to some improvement. Unfortunately, I was mistaken. The very next weekend, I decided to host a small gathering in my backyard. I invited a few close friends to enjoy the pleasant Charleston weather. As a centerpiece for the event, I displayed a collection of rare orchids that I'd been cultivating for years. As the afternoon unfolded, laughter and conversation filled the air. Suddenly, amidst the chatter, I heard the unmistakable sound of giggling and rapid footsteps. Turning towards the source, I was horrified to see Jake and Lucas dashing through my yard. Before I could react, they barreled straight into the table holding my precious orchids. Pots toppled, soil scattered, and the delicate flowers were crushed underfoot. "Jake! Lucas!" I shouted, my voice a mix of shock and anger. "Stop!" The boys paused, glancing at the destruction they'd caused. Instead of showing remorse, they burst into laughter and ran back to their house, leaving a trail of chaos behind them. I stood there, heart pounding, surveying the wreckage of my beloved orchids. These weren't just plants. They were the result of years of dedication and care. The loss felt deeply personal. Determined to protect my sanctuary, I decided to take matters into my own hands. It was clear that Sarah wasn't going to intervene, so I needed a solution that would deter the boys without causing them harm. After some research and contemplation, I devised a plan. I purchased a motion-activated sprinkler system designed to deter animals from entering gardens. The system was sensitive enough to detect even the slightest movement, ensuring that any intruder, human or animal, would be met with a sudden burst of water. I spent the next few days installing the sprinklers, strategically placing them around my yard to cover all possible entry points. Once set up, I tested the system to ensure it functioned correctly. Satisfied with the results, I waited. Early the following morning, as the sun began to cast its golden hues over Charleston, I was awakened by the sound of high-pitched screams coming from my backyard. I quickly got out of bed and peered through the window. There they were, Jake and Lucas, soaked from head to toe, sputtering and slipping in the mud created by the sprinklers. Their faces were a mix of shock, confusion, and embarrassment. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction. Perhaps now they would think twice before trespassing. But the situation was far from over. Less than an hour later, I heard a furious pounding on my front door. Bracing myself, I opened it to find Sarah standing there, her clothes drenched and streaked with mud. Her face was contorted with rage. "How dare you?" she screamed, her voice echoing through the neighborhood. My boys came home soaked, and when I went to see what happened, I got drenched too. I remained calm, meeting her fiery gaze. "Sarah, your children have been repeatedly trespassing and damaging my property. I installed the sprinklers to deter any further intrusions." "You did this on purpose," she accused, pointing a trembling finger at me. "I installed the sprinklers on my property to water my garden and deter pests," I replied evenly. "If your children hadn't been trespassing, they wouldn't have been affected." Her face turned a shade redder. "This is unacceptable. You had no right." She was shaking with anger, fists clenched, dripping water pooling at her feet on my front porch. I could smell the muddy grass on her clothes, mixed with the unmistakable stench of entitlement. "You set up a trap for children," she hissed, stepping closer like she was about to slap the logic out of me. I didn't flinch. "No, Sarah. I installed a sprinkler system to protect my garden from damage. Your kids just happened to trigger it." She looked ready to explode. "You're lucky I don't call the cops." I tilted my head, staying calm. "Go ahead. I've got cameras too. Footage of your kids destroying my property over and over. I've been documenting everything." That stopped her. She stared at me, her mouth slightly open like she hadn't thought anyone would dare to push back. She turned, muttering curses under her breath, and stormed back to her house. I shut the door and leaned against it, my heart thumping. But it didn't end there. That night, around 11 p.m., I was just about to go to bed when I heard strange noises coming from my backyard. I peeked through the blinds and froze. Someone was back there with a flashlight. My blood ran cold. I grabbed my phone, opened my security camera app, and pulled up the live feed. It was Sarah. She was in her pajamas, standing in the middle of my garden with what looked like a garden hoe. Her hair was wild, her movements erratic. And she was smashing something, my new sprinkler heads. I didn't think. I called 911. While I waited for the police, I quietly recorded everything from my upstairs window. She moved with rage, muttering to herself, pulling out sprinkler pipes, stomping on flower beds, yanking up my lawn lights. It was pure destruction. I stayed on the line with dispatch until the red and blue lights finally lit up my street. Sarah didn't even try to run. She just stood there, panting, sweaty, her hands covered in dirt and plastic pieces. The officers took my statement. I showed them the live footage. One of them looked at Sarah and asked, "Ma'am, do you have anything to say for yourself?" She started sobbing instantly. "He's targeting my kids. He's trying to make our lives miserable." One officer raised an eyebrow. "By watering his lawn?" I almost laughed, but I held it in. They cuffed her. She screamed for Jake and Lucas, who were now crying on their porch in their little Spider-Man pajamas. It was a scene. She didn't go to jail that night, but she was cited for trespassing and destruction of property. They made her leave my yard and told her not to step foot on my property again. I was granted a temporary restraining order within days. But it didn't stop there. Because the next twist? 2 days later, a strange man knocked on my door. He was tall, with a clipboard and a polo shirt. Said he was from the local HOA committee. "We've received complaints," he said, flipping through his notes. "Your sprinkler system is considered an aggressive installation. A few neighbors have expressed concerns." I stared at him, dumbfounded. "Concerns? About sprinklers?" He nodded. "It's been described as a deliberate tool of hostility." I nearly laughed out loud. I asked to see the complaints. He refused. "They're anonymous." Of course they were. It was clear Sarah was trying to turn the neighborhood against me. The very same woman who destroyed my garden at midnight was now playing victim, pretending I was some deranged old man with booby traps in the grass. I told the HOA rep to come back with a warrant or official citation. He left with a forced smile. I started noticing other things after that. Trash dumped near my driveway. My mailbox left open and stuffed with torn flyers. Dog poop smeared on my welcome mat. Always small things, nothing big enough to prove, but enough to send a message. The neighborhood tension was rising. Neighbors who used to wave now looked the other way. Some whispered when I passed by. One lady even muttered, "Hope your water games don't hurt my dog." As I walked by, I was being painted as the villain. And just when I thought it couldn't get worse, I got a notice from the city. An inspection had been scheduled. Someone had reported me for excessive water usage and potential hazards to community safety. That's when I realized this wasn't just about kids and flowers anymore. This was war. I spent the next day pacing in my kitchen, staring at the city notice like it was a time bomb. An inspection for a sprinkler system? In Charleston? In summer? That's like being ticketed for owning a fan during a heat wave. It reeked of Sarah's doing. But I wasn't going to roll over. I cleaned up my yard, made everything look pristine. I printed out my receipts for the sprinkler system, the water usage logs from my online utility account, and screenshots from my security camera app. I even included photos of my lawn before and after the kids' destruction. I wanted the inspector to see the full picture. The inspector arrived 2 days later, an older guy named Roy. He stepped onto my lawn, looked around, and shook his head. "Damn nice yard," he muttered. "Thanks," I said, watching him like a hawk. He walked the perimeter, jotted down notes, asked about the sprinklers. I explained everything, how I had installed them after multiple property damage incidents, how I had tried to resolve things civilly, and how it was only after being ignored and laughed at that I took action. Roy sighed and put his notepad away. "You're not in violation of anything," he said. "Honestly, I've seen people do worse with plastic flamingos. But between you and me, someone really wants to stir the pot." "I know who," I said. He gave me a look, the kind of look that says I can't say it, but I know too. "I'm closing the report. No fines, no follow-up. Just maybe keep a low profile for a bit." I nodded and thanked him, but I knew the battle was far from over. Then came the police visit. 3 days after the inspection, a cruiser pulled into my driveway. My stomach dropped. 2 officers stepped out. One of them was the same officer who had responded to the garden vandalism. They knocked. "Mr. Gaines," the younger one said, "we've received a complaint about harassment. A woman claims you've been filming her and her children without consent." I blinked. "What?" "She says you have cameras pointed directly at her property." Now I was angry. "My cameras are on my property," I said, "and they're pointed at my yard. I can show you right now. Want to see the footage of her in my garden with a hoe?" The older cop gave a small smirk. We walked inside and I pulled up the footage again. This time I pointed out the camera angles, clearly facing my lawn, my walkway, my porch. Nothing even close to infringing on her privacy. The officers watched for a few minutes, nodded, and told me they'd file a report but no laws had been broken. "This is getting ridiculous," I said. "We see it more often than you think," the younger one replied. "Some people try to fight dirty when they lose control." That night, I sat outside on my porch for a long time. I watched Sarah through the slats in my fence as she sat on her deck, sipping wine and staring into the dark. I wasn't sure who she was anymore. Then, a new twist I didn't expect, her ex-husband showed up. It was a Thursday evening. I was pulling weeds near my fence line when a black SUV pulled up in front of Sarah's house. Out stepped a tall man with tired eyes and a military buzz cut. He looked around, clearly unimpressed. I watched from a distance as he knocked on her door. She opened it and the shouting started almost immediately. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone said it all. They were not on good terms. Later that night, I caught movement in my side yard again. I flipped open my app. This time it was the man. Alone. He was inspecting the broken fence post that Jake and Lucas had cracked weeks ago during one of their backyard wrestling sessions. He looked directly at my camera. Then he gave a short nod and walked off. I wasn't sure what to make of it. The next morning, I found an envelope in my mailbox with no name. Inside was a handwritten note. "You're not crazy. She lets those kids run wild. If you need a witness for the next court hearing, call me. D." It was signed only with an initial. I stared at the note for a long time. What court hearing? What was Sarah hiding? My gut told me something bigger was going on, something deeper than petty neighbor drama. And when I checked my cameras that night, I saw something that changed everything. It wasn't Jake or Lucas sneaking into my yard this time. It was Sarah again, only this time she wasn't alone. She had a man with her. Not the ex-husband. Someone younger. They were dragging something from the back of her SUV. A large black trash bag. And they buried it. In her backyard. At midnight. I don't know what it was. I don't want to jump to conclusions. But it wasn't yard waste. It wasn't leaves or grass clippings. And they kept looking over their shoulders, moving fast, panicked. I downloaded the footage. I backed it up 3 times. This isn't just about sprinklers anymore. This is something else entirely. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying the footage of Sarah and that man, dragging that bag into her backyard and burying it under the cover of darkness like something out of a low-budget crime doc. I zoomed in, enhanced the lighting, adjusted contrast, anything to confirm what I already feared. Whatever it wasn't normal. And that backyard? It bordered my fence. If this was something illegal, something dangerous, it wasn't just her mess anymore, it was bleeding into my life, my home, my peace. By morning, I'd had enough. I emailed the footage to myself, printed screenshots, and took a drive to the police station. I didn't make any wild accusations, I just calmly showed the video and explained the history, the trespassing, the damage, the threats, the sudden buried mystery bag. The officer took notes. Promised to forward it to a detective. 2 days later, it all came to a head. It was a Saturday afternoon. I was raking leaves when 2 unmarked police cars rolled down our street. They didn't use sirens. Just parked right in front of Sarah's house. Sarah stepped out onto her porch like she'd been expecting a package. But it wasn't a package. It was 2 detectives, calm and polite, asking to speak with her. At first, she was composed. But as they kept talking, her voice rose. She got defensive. Loud. Neighbors started to gather. People stood on porches. Some pulled out phones. Then one of the detectives asked to see the backyard. She lost it. "No," she shouted. "You can't just dig around my property without a warrant." "Ma'am," the lead detective said, still calm, "we have probable cause. We've already secured one." That's when she turned, pointed across the street. At me. "This is his fault. He's been harassing me. He's the one spying, making up lies." All eyes turned to me. I didn't flinch. "Then why are you the one burying things in the middle of the night?" I said loud enough for the crowd to hear. Her face twisted. You're obsessed with my family. You're a creepy old man with nothing better to do. That's when someone else spoke up, someone I didn't expect. Her ex-husband. He'd been standing at the corner, arms folded, silent until now. She's been like this since we split, he said. That bag? I know what it is. It's the kids' stolen electronics. She took them from a store last week, panicked, told her boyfriend they'd blamed Jake and Lucas. So she buried them? Dead silence. The air was heavy. People started murmuring. I saw one neighbor whisper to another. Phones were still recording. Sarah's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. That's not true, she whispered, her voice cracking. The detective signaled to an officer who went into the backyard with a shovel. Minutes later, they brought the bag out. And just like that, the truth was out in the open. The items were confirmed as stolen from a downtown Charleston tech shop, items reported missing 2 weeks ago. It matched the timeline. The cameras. Everything. The confrontation broke Sarah. She broke down screaming, yelling that it was all her ex's fault, that he abandoned her, that I pushed her to the edge, that the system made her do it. Nobody moved. Nobody defended her. Even Jake and Lucas stood by the porch, looking scared but not surprised. As she was taken away, cuffed, she looked at me one last time. Not with anger. With pure hatred. The aftermath was quiet. For once. I sat on my porch that evening, watching the sunset bleed into the marshes. Jake and Lucas were taken by their father, who, for all his flaws, at least seemed stable. I saw him packing bags from the house later that night. A few neighbors came by over the next few days. Some apologized. Others offered small talk. One woman, Mrs. Daly from 2 houses down, brought me a pie. I thought you were the crazy one, she admitted. Turns out you were the only sane one. I just nodded. I didn't even have the energy to say, I told you so. Weeks passed. The lawn grew quiet again. I replaced my orchids. The sprinkler system still clicks on when it senses movement. But now, no one dares test it. There's still a faint dent in the grass where the bag was dragged across. I never fixed it. I leave it there as a reminder of what happens when people cross boundaries, and how those boundaries aren't always just fences. Do I feel guilty? A little. Not about the sprinklers or the cameras, but about the kids. They didn't ask for any of this. They were just imitating the chaos they saw every day. I hope they get a better chance now. Maybe with their dad. Maybe with therapy. Maybe just with peace. As for me, I'm still here. Still mowing the lawn. Still planting flowers. But now I look a little harder when someone moves in next door. Trust takes time. And sometimes, it takes a buried trash bag to remind you that not every neighborly smile is honest. I'm not angry anymore. Just tired. And finally, for the first time in months, quiet.